Hello, friends. This recording here of this live stream on Instagram is going to be posted onto my podcast. So, hello and welcome to the Zach Thinks Your podcast. Excited in just a few moments. We're going to be joined by Dr. Morgan Cutlip. She wrote this book here, A Better Share. I've been loving this chapter that she is talking about mental load. Chapter 3, Two Truths and a Lie about the mental load. So, I'm going to be talking with her quite a bit about specifically what's going on in here. I want her to share a little bit more about, I know she made a post a couple weeks ago about the difference between Fairplay and A Better Share, as I do think there are differences between them, but I think she's going to do a lot better job talking about the differences in those. I would say Dr. Morgan and I talk about a lot of similar things, certainly from a very different direction, if you will. She's helping a lot of moms help better understand, articulate, and work with improving on the mental load with men. Hey,
Hey,
Dr. Morgan.
how are ya?
It's great to see you.
Good to see you too. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I was just introducing you. I was introducing your book.
Thank you.
And I wanted the two things I would love for you to share about with today. One, I think, especially because you know me, I talk about fair play ad nauseum.
Yeah, I
So
love Fairplay.
talking about some of the differentiation between what some of the things you talk about comparatively to fair play.
Yeah.
And I'm really loving chapter 3, the two truths and a lie. So I think maybe starting off with sort of introducing yourself to people that are not familiar with you, because I told them at the beginning this is going to be recorded as a podcast as well.
Okay.
Introducing yourself and then starting off with like, what's the difference between this and fair play?
Sure. Yeah. So, my name's Morgan Cutlip. I have a PhD in psychology, and I've been in the field of relationships for over 20 years. So that sort of frames my position and my approach to the mental load is I almost approach it as a relationship issue, which is part of how I'm different than fair play. In some ways, one of my main skill sets is really taking research and theory and translating it into really practical and tangible tools. Personally, I live in Southern California. I'm from Ohio, though. I have been married for almost 17 years, two kids, 9 and 11, and my husband, Chad. I always joke. He's like a dude. So I feel like, in education, in my training, you learn all these psychological theories, you learn the research, you learn personality theory, all this stuff. But actually, like taking that and using it in your relationship takes some work over time and takes some like practice. And so a lot of the stuff I talk about in my book, in my content, is stuff that's based on, research theory and best practices in psychology. But honestly, it's like stuff I've had to work out in my own relationship. And so I speak a lot from personal experience, and pushing through some of those tension points that I know you talk about all the time and help men especially with. So I think that's everything to
Yeah.
introduce me.
Yeah. I mean,
So
it
go
definitely
for it.
made me on like a, wow. I just talk about my personal life and I talk about my own experience of where I fuck up the mental load versus you have a significant amount of training around this versus I'm just out here existing, talking shit on the internet.
No, it's not true. You offer a really beautiful perspective. And I think that, one of my beliefs is that we have to welcome men to the conversation around this. And I know that that's not always an easy thing to do because there's a lot of frustration around how men show up. But I think that's one of the wonderful things that you offer is that you are offering a male perspective. You're sharing it from a place of kind of like this enlightened perspective. And also, I'm still will make a misstep. And so you break that down so wonderfully. So it's important. You're an important voice. Yeah, you're an
Don't
important
worry
voice,
about
Zach.
it. But yeah, so for a lot of my viewers,
Yeah,
I think a lot of people, so I preach about the fair play method
yeah.
in Eve Rodsky, she approached it from a sort of a legal standpoint
Yeah.
as a lawyer. She approached it from a standpoint of having a lot of the pains herself, not necessarily training people to deal with them, but it evolved out of the shit I do list she
Yes.
had created that really took off with people. I'm a facilitator, and I think a huge, if I were to boil down fair play into two ideas, it would be like CPE, like taking full
Mhm.
planning and execution of something, putting
Mhm.
it together, along with minimum standards of care of like standard operating procedures. Um,
Yes.
so and now you talk about sex in here,
Yeah.
which I don't remember anything about sex
It's
in fair play.
no. So, okay, so here are the main
Yeah,
differences. And just for the record, I adore Eve Rodsky. I adore Fair Play. I feel like she really just I mean, she started a conversation that has changed the dialogue in relationships. And so her contribution just like cannot be emphasized enough. And I'll share this in a minute, but when I'd actually had already finished my first draft, but her and I had a conversation and she was like, this is what's missing. This is what I'm hoping you cover. And I was like, it's all in the book. And she's like, perfect. So we were really aligned on some of the things I was talking about. So here's where I wanted to just add to the conversation. I don't feel like there is a better solution to the actual logistical handoff. Her fair play cards are genius. It's like tangible. You see it right in front of you. You're actually physically doing that. Like I'm not trying to compete with
yeah,
that. Here's what I saw in my community, which is that, and when I hear from women in relationships especially, is that there are a lot of people who can't get to the place where they're actually handing things off and doing that logistical, like kind of negotiation because there's so many barriers to even talking about the mental load. You know,
hmm
they get the defensiveness, the hardship Olympics, the dismissiveness and minimization. You know, you make things harder than you need to. I don't know why your expectations are so high. So all these barriers get in the way of a productive conversation, and people need to learn and need to know how to navigate some of these things in order to get to a place where they can find a better share or they can find a fair share for navigating this stuff. The other piece that I wanted to add was that uh, the mental load, it's like it starts as this thing that feels really unfair, but then it starts to infiltrate the dynamics of a relationship to the point where then it creates distance, disconnection, coldness, tension, bad attitudes toward each other, and then it infiltrates the sex life. I mean, it has a pretty direct effect actually on your sex
yeah.
life, but it starts to like be difficult to figure out like what happened to us as a couple, like what's going on. And I do think a lot of times it can be traced back to stuff that really is occurring around the mental load. So I wanted to approach it from a relational perspective. This is how things start to kind of unravel. This is how disconnection really happens. And what can we do to really try to preserve the relationship, work through some of those tension points, and get to a place where we feel like things are navigated in a way that feels fair to both people involved.
So I know that probably I get this question, and I don't make reels on it because I know I'm going to get a bunch of crap from people saying, Zach,
Yeah,
we bear all the emotional labor, and now you're telling us to do more of it. But the question
yeah,
I often get is, how do I explain mental load to my partner? And I think
yeah.
your book, would you say it was more written to men or to women? Because I know one of the challenges with Fair Play for sure is like it was written to women, and when I'm talking with a lot of guys, I'm like, buckle up. Like first three
Buckle
chapters
up.
kind of bumpy. What would you say? What how do you think it'll be received differently, or maybe the same from men?
Yeah, I get pushback on things as well sometimes, and I'm sort of like I'm not a very confrontational
Mm,
person. Like I'm very reasonable. So but I'm also like this is kind of like the hill I'll die on.
yeah.
So I will kind of go to bat for this, which is a couple things. First of all, just to say, I think the anger that women feel is totally justified. And I think it makes sense, and I felt it. So never am I ever saying that that doesn't have like a place or isn't valid. And I want to add to that. If we want to get to, a better place in our relationships and we're not wanting to leave our relationship. So it's like we have a generally good partner, but we're not happy with how things are going right now. We have to have tools to navigate the conversation. And so one of the pushbacks is, well, why do I have to bring it up as the woman? And I get it. And also, if we're the ones who are really wanting the change and we're feeling the pain, we are the best advocates for ourselves. And this is one of the things I spoke about with Eve. And she's like, women have to understand that even though we can be the victims in this situation, victims have power, and then they can institute change. And I was like, I fully am on board with this. I believe this. I talk about this in the book. So I think that's one thing that's really important, is that I understand it doesn't feel fair to have to bear the emotional labor of this conversation. And I think the mental load is we're playing long game here, and we're wanting fairness in our relationships. And sometimes we might have to invest a little bit of that energy to get to a place where in the end it all feels much better. The second thing is I had this like secret agenda of writing a book that men would be able to handle reading.
Mm.
Like that would be palatable
Yeah.
and not pandering, not like, oh, everything's fine, but also that was like, I'm not going to come at you hard. I'm not going to attack you, but I'm going to spell it out. This is what's going on. I want you to see the differences here. I want you to see where maybe some of your beliefs are sabotaging your relationship. I want you to see what she really needs. And I'm going to also talk about what you need. But I really wanted a book that welcomed them into the conversation. And my ultimate motivation for this, I have my son knocking on my door. Hold on, buddy. He's like, of course he's homesick today, but I don't think he's sick. Um, my ultimate motivation was that I wanted to carry the weight for women. If we can get the male partners, if they're going to read this book and they're going to consume it and they're going to really digest this information, then I have handled the responsibility of explaining what the mental load is, talking about what we need, giving tangible tools, and that is like the gift that I wanted to impart. And so I'm hoping that's what's been accomplished. And so far the feedback has been good
Yeah.
from male readers.
Yeah, and I was listening to one of the podcasts you did the other day where the guy was like, "Hey, can we fast forward to the better sex?" And like, I mean, as much as like I know that that is not necessarily the long-term intention. The intention is that the relationship is better.
Yeah.
I thought you did a good job articulating like that the men owning the mental load really is like a real pretty direct correlation, not causation, but correlation.
Yeah.
Because who wants to take their pants off when they're thinking about diaper size uh, changes and knowing that the kids need new soccer gear for the springtime, um,
Yep.
and like knowing that your partner is in that battle with you, is carrying that mental labor with you, like is going to lead to better sex. Um,
Totally. And also, sex is vulnerable. Sex requires that you like strip it all down, and I mean literally and figuratively, and you are giving yourself to somebody.
yeah.
So if your partner, if you come to your partner and you're like, I'm so overwhelmed, and they're like, well, you just make a mountain out of a molehill. Like, I don't understand what your problem is. This is just life. Life is busy. Make a list or tell me what to do. If you don't feel like they are safe to come to, and then fast forward 3, 4 hours and they're like, you in the mood? It's like, absolutely not. I don't feel safe with you. I don't feel cared for by you. So there are like a lot of I feel like there are like three main ways that it impacts our sex life, but there's a lot of ways that it has a pretty intense impact on our feeling of desire toward our partners. And I think, hey, if that is a motivating factor for guys to participate more in this conversation, whatever, but like let's come to the table, let's talk about this and make changes in our relationships.
Yeah, it's funny. It brings up for me. I remember back in 2018, the year we got separated, before we were separated, I remember thinking I was making a joke, but I kind of yelled into, I was talking about, I was probably holding some of the mental load and the domestic labor around our current situation. We didn't have kids
Yeah.
at the time, we didn't have a dog yet. And I was saying, like, I feel like I'm always trying to check all the boxes before I even consider like coming on to you. Um,
Yeah.
I feel like that was, I might have been on to something in some way, like
Yeah.
knowing and appreciating that correlation, that like there are a lot of things that need to be able to, she needed to feel cared for, and those were the best things that were thinking that he needed to feel care before she was going to be open to being intimate.
Yeah.
Um, So I'm hoping that that is a little bit of the carrot that helps them get through the
Right.
mental load. See it because I think, yeah, I think similar to me, like my videos, I aim to be palatable enough that you can put my video in front of the guy and
Yes.
he can see it. I had such a cool moment last night at a library. Someone said, are you Zach? And every once in a while, probably, I think it's happened, I think up to like 12 times in it
That's
now,
awesome.
where someone said that. And she's like, thank you. Thank you for helping like improve the conversations we're having at home. Cause I feel like
Yes.
having I'm working on my own proposal, but um, I think having a book you can hand to somebody for them to lean in so that you don't have to do all of the emotional labor up front of describing it. Yeah, you are aiming to do half the work right there.
Yes.
And sometimes we
Exactly.
need to hear it from, a different person other than our spouse. And it's I know it's sad to say, I know a lot of times guys need to hear from another guy, but I think sometimes they just need to hear from another person
I
that
know. Yeah, it's an annoying thing. I don't know why I think probably men and women can be like that sometimes, but I know it's happened before where I've said something to my husband over and over, and then all of a sudden he like sees a reel. He's like, "Have you heard about this?" It's like, dude.
yeah.
So whatever gets us to the end point, whatever gets us to a place of enjoying each other in our relationships, feeling like things are fair, living in a relationship without resentment. I mean, that right there is such a heavy burden to carry. And so if we can move the needle, I think that that's what I'm after. I know you are too.
What is so coming back to, I know I got
Yeah.
side in the question. By the way, I know originally we had allocated 15 minutes, but I can go over if you can go over.
Yeah, as long as my son doesn't come in. So we're good.
Um,
Poor kids locked outside.
so I know that the question I'm constantly asking quietly in the DMs is like, how do you explain how do I better explain mental load to my husband?
Mm.
What do you did well in the book in those early chapters to help the men bridge that conversation?
Yeah, so I try to really explain it in a number of ways because everybody kind of we need to hear things more than once and we need to hear things in different sort of forms. So I tell a story that kind of lays out a pretty probably relatable interaction between my husband and I, which demonstrates my mental load. And then when I describe the mental load and define it, I explain it. And then I also give a visual. I can probably pop it up here on the screen. But I remember when I was doing my interviews, so I surveyed women about the mental load and then I interviewed men and women. And one of the women was like, "Can you please make a visual of the mental load?" And so it was a big priority to me to really put that, and see if I can even find it in the book. And part of what I wanted to explain that I think is like a sticking point in a lot of relationships, so that's the visual, and I break it down. It's pretty early on. Um, but here's what I see happen time and time again. A woman will get overwhelmed. She comes to her partner, she rattles off her to-do list or rattles off the sort of tasks that are overwhelming her. The guy hears, oh, these are like physical tasks. Like, oh, I gotta make dinner, I gotta pick the kids up, I gotta enroll them in extracurriculars, I gotta look at summer camps. And they're like, I don't get it. Just do the things, or just tell me what to do. I'll take care of it. Um, and it doesn't fully capture why it feels so overwhelming. And so I wanted to break that down. And why it feels so overwhelming is because that each one of these line items can be unpacked to contain effort in both not just the physical domain, which is again where men tend to go, but also the mental, and then especially, which is hard for sometimes to articulate, the emotional domain. And so in the visual, I give three, like a Venn diagram, where there's three circles for the physical, the mental, and the emotional domains. And then I talk about the intersection, which I call the triple threat. So I say that most of the items in home and family life are actually occurring as triple threat items, which means that you're exerting effort in all three of these domains. So like dinner isn't just dinner. Dinner is chopping, cooking, shopping, looking through your pantry, seeing what ingredients you have, finding a recipe, thinking about who's going to eat what, how do I get enough nutritional value for them, how do I make sure nobody's asking for a bar at bedtime or having a meltdown because they're hangry. It's like it unpacks to include all of this work. And that is the piece that I think is often hard for women to articulate. It's hard for men to understand. And so, but that unpacking is what explains sort of like why it's so intense, why it follows you everywhere, why it's hard to hand off, and why it takes up so much energy, space, and leads to a lot of worry and anxiety, especially that emotional piece.
Yeah, and I feel like one of the my typical answer to that question in the DM is pretty much taking your language there around like the triple threat and like trying to
Yeah.
what are the things in their jobs that have the triple threat. So if you're a
Yes.
sales doing the emotional labor of making sure you're showing up on time, that your slides look good, that you're being you're having good etiquette in having your conversations in your emails,
Yeah.
and then doing the mental load of I know when I was in sales and like trying to book meetings with people as my job, um, you know, you're taught to assume some of the sale, and you don't say, "Hey, when's a good time for you to
Yeah.
meet next week?" You say, "Hey, is Tuesday at 11:30
Yeah.
available for you?" And like taking down that decision fatigue. So I think a ton of those triple threat things exist in the corporate workplace, and because we haven't contextualized it into invisible labor, I think that creating it as an objective concept rather than like a domestic only subject, I feel like that at least those videos that occurred to me is really valuable for them.
Oh,
um,
yeah. I think that's a great way because a lot of times men can identify it in their work life, but they really struggle to apply that same sort of thinking to their home life. And it's because a lot of what we do in the home is undervalued. It does kind of get minimized in their eyes. So I did a podcast a long time ago with a man, and I was like, if you had a pie chart, how much of your energy and thought is around home life versus work life. And he was like 75% work life. And I think, not to stereotype, but if we were to paint with broad brushstrokes, I think that a lot of men kind of would say something similar. So I think that's such a smart way to describe it to men.
Yeah, I think between the people that follow both of us, I think the chapter three, the two truths and why about mental load, I think everyone is in agreement on the truths. The lie I thought was an interesting take on it that
Yeah.
I'd love to hear you share a little bit more about. I'll come up to it. So
You want me to describe the lie?
yeah, yeah, please.
Okay, so the lie is around the currency we use in our home and family life. So I talk about how in society, currency is obviously money, but money is equated with value and with power. I don't believe that that framework or that model fits in our home and family life, but we tend to just kind of slap it on and operate in the same way. And so when we do that, it does a couple of things. If the default parent is like a stay-at-home parent, then they feel like because I don't earn money, I don't have a right to ask for more participation at home. So they feel less valuable and they have less power. Or if they make less money, they might feel the same way. I think the other piece is that a lot of times the partner who then brings in more money feels almost a sense of kind of like entitlement to more rest at home. And so I put forward the idea of instead of the currency at home being money, it should be time and energy. And it becomes a really easy checkpoint in your relationship. Like when both partners are finally home at the end of the day or they're off of work at the end of the day, they can quickly touch in like how much time do you have available? Where are you at energy wise? And it's a flexible approach, like a more fluid approach, but let's check in on these two areas and what can you give and what can I give and how can we support each other? And I think if you just, it's a hard thing to wrap your head around. My husband and I went back and forth on this for a while, especially because I work from home, plus I'm the main parent, and it was just like all muddied,
Yeah,
which a lot of families situations like the work and home life is very muddied. We went round and round, but I think if you just kind of like think logically, it does not make sense for it to be money. So if I worked an hour a week, I made $1 million. My husband worked, 60 hours a week, made 50,000. Am I entitled to more rest because I make more money? Like it does not translate in the same way. And so we really have to work hard to shift this belief system at home.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, the time and energy. I think there have been a lot of moments. I think where Alyssa and I have worked on trying debunk this. It's just like living in a capitalist society. Like it's
Yeah.
hard to unlearn that. There's one of the guys that I work with. Like he was talking about how he was feeling like it seems like a waste of time to do the thing that she's asking me when I can just task grab it, like hire someone to go do it.
Yeah.
And I was saying, hey man, like the reason you're a successful CEO is because you got really good at converting effort to dollars and
Mhm.
knowing when for you to do that thing versus delegating that thing using your money. And that conversion rate doesn't translate when you get home, which I feel like is kind of what you're saying there.
Yes.
Like the ability to convert and delegate, it doesn't work nearly the same when you look at the partnership of the home. And you really have to look more at the 24 hours are not delegatable the way they are in a corporate setting. Um,
Yes. Yes, and I mean, and okay, and so families sometimes do need to delegate and do need to hire these things out, but we also have to remember that all of that requires management. Like anytime I've handed something over or delegated it, like I'm still carrying it and navigating it. So it's like if that's going to be part of your family, kind of how your family operates, is you're going to be paying people to do some of these things. Well, you still need to talk about and negotiate who's going to manage that because that is not like a, oh, we're done, just pay some guy to come do this. It's actually still requires quite a lot of work and follow up and all of those things. Sorry. I don't I'm gonna take you on a journey as I unlock my door. I'm sorry. My son might be making a cameo in this.
yeah, I remember last time, I
I'm
think when the
on
last
a call, sweetie.
time,
What do you need, love? Okay, you can come in the house, but you have to be quiet. Sorry. Real life.
yeah,
I think last time we did one of these for my other book, I think you were in the throes of watching your kids.
yeah,
So we have traded places.
yeah, we're in the other direction.
Yeah, sorry about that.
What do you think? What's been some of the? I know no, I have not produced a book. This is your second one.
Hmm.
And man, I remember when I read some of your first one and hearing that you guys thrive on, I think you were talking about like when you guys are doing renovations together that you thrive. I
Yeah.
was like, uh, like how? How do you have clearly a very different dynamic between the two of you.
Hmm.
But I also appreciate you talked about like the way that you wrote that book, like you were talking about, you had to crank it out in those weekends, and your daughter, I think it was having trouble with like,
Hmm.
oh, like I'm not. What do you mean I'm not going to get to spend all this time with mommy? And so it was like you were finding that balance of like not like not pushing aside, but acknowledging the shame and or the guilt that you were feeling as a mom, and finding like a way to balance that. It sounds like the difference between that book was like it sounds like you were grappling with a lot of like the mom shame, the mom guilt,
Hmm.
um, and like almost like figuring yourself out first. And
Hmm.
this book feels more like bridging the conversation, um, elongating the healing and the unlearning into like a partner
Yeah.
conversation rather than a self-talk.
Yeah, that's such a great observation. And I remember talking with my publisher when we were trying to decide what book comes first. And ultimately, we decided the mom book comes first. And I mean, it's for moms, but it's really a relationship with self book. And way back, way years ago, when I started talking about the mental load, I would often talk about it as a within issue and a between issue. So there is self work that's involved a lot of times when it comes to the mental load. And then there's the dynamic work, which is like, how do we do the fair piece? And so the first book is a little bit of my self work, which is like, as a woman, we have all of these internalized messages. Like one piece of it is around having needs, wanting to be that super mom to do it all. We're judged for how well we should take care of and show up for our family. We're judged for what our homes look like. We're judged for how our kids are behaving. All these sort of things play on us. And I talk about in the second book, like the game's kind of rigged in terms of setting us up to carry a lot more as women. And so part of at least my story, and I think a lot of women's story, is that we have to develop. I say this like with an asterisk, but like we have to develop a healthy sense of entitlement to step into asking for what we need and to shifting the dynamic. Modern family life is changing. The way my parents did things and, many of the previous generation, how they did things is very different than how we're functioning now. And so we have to adjust, but we're like using the old models and we're like applying them to our life. And so it's tricky to like be like, okay, wait, this is what I saw. This is how it's been done. Now we got to do it differently. So I've got to unlearn some things. I got to make some changes and I have to operate a little differently in my relationship. And then you throw in, another person and you're like, hopefully they're on board with these changes. And sometimes it's a slow grow or sometimes there's tension. But I think, both pieces is like part of the puzzle to making these shifts. And, when you zoom out in like terms of like the big picture perspective, all that we're doing, all the work you're doing, Zach, all the work I'm trying to do is like we're trying to shape the next generation of family and relationships. Because if we do this work now, our kids are going to see something different, expect something different, and they're going to take that into their partnerships. And it's going to have this like tidal wave effect, which is so powerful. Anyway, I think it's just such important work.
Yeah, I feel like the one video that really changed my mind about like two concepts. One video, one was like when I heard that the word parenting wasn't even like a thing until like the 80s or something. That
Yeah.
like the 50s, it was just like I don't know where the kids are. I think they're breathing. Was like mentality, and then today we're like, especially the good old 2010s of Instagram created
Yeah.
this very perfectionist experience that people had coming on Instagram being like, oh my God, why doesn't my kitchen look like that? Why doesn't
Yeah.
my living room look like that? Um, and then like I think it was I was hearing a mom talk about last night I had to be up at midnight for when swim lessons practice slots were open. And
Oh, yes.
if I didn't get to them within the first like 2 minutes, they're all gonna fill up, and then my kid misses out on eight. Like they're like 8 weeks behind their classmates, and then they're in the
Yep.
and like there's like unraveling of their entire young social life, and just thinking like that's the world we live in.
Yeah.
That it requires like a corporate business level of management and thinking for our kids to thrive, seemingly, versus
Yes.
it was like show up to the park and hope there's a lifeguard for
Totally. Like you watch The Sandlot, like they're not even supervised. I don't know how accurate it is, but I'm like, that looks kind of nice. Yeah, I think that's like another piece that isn't it's just not talked about a lot when we talk about the mental load, and somebody's kind of asking about this. But the way we're doing family life now, and I'm not saying that it's wrong or I'm not, judging that. I mean, I'm in it, I'm doing it. But the amount of responsibilities we have on our plate, the amount of like expectations we're striving for, the way that we're parenting to really foster a development of emotional intelligence, the cost of living and all that that requires in terms of just individual hustle, the standards we have for how we keep our home. Like I remember homes growing up were like really messy and cluttered. I don't see that very often when I visit people's homes. Maybe they're like cleaning up beforehand, but it seems like things are changing. But the way that we do modern family life is almost like more than two people can handle. I think, we have to remember that. And I'm not saying, oh, this is taking away from how partners need to step in more, but I think also sometimes it helps to just kind of like call out the massive like elephant in the room, which is like, oh my gosh, life is wild, is busy, and it's kind of like this relentless onslaught of demands on our time and our attention and our effort. Like I last weekend, I think I folded laundry for like 3 or 4 hours, and I have help with laundry. Okay. So like I'm gonna be totally transparent. I have help with it and I folded it for 4 hours. I cleaned the kitchen for like an hour and a half. And my husband all weekend was doing stuff too. He was doing our taxes. He was spraying off the decks, which I had asked him to do. And like we had talked about, he was taking care of a bunch of other things. And I went to bed that night and there was a new pile of laundry to fold and the kitchen was messy. And it's not like we weren't both
Yeah.
working. You know, it's so I think that's also just like, let's call a spade, which is like, it's a lot. It's a lot on modern families, and we are navigating a lot as couples,
Yeah.
and it's exhausting. And not like that offers relief for people, but also like
Yeah.
let's normalize that there's just a lot that we're trying to manage.
Well, Dr. Morgan, if I practice what I preach, then I gotta go because my others out there. But thank you for talking
Yeah,
with me today. Your book came out this week. That was really interesting to hear that like you were debating which book to come out with first. Um, so knowing that this is not necessarily a that the other one is a prerequisite or anything,
yeah,
but I've already enjoyed it. I think for guys that have already started this conversation, I think a lot of the guys that I work with
yeah,
in will understand and be nodding their head along with the beginning. And then I think maybe the sex part is something that I don't really touch on even in my coaching.
yeah.
So that's fresh for them. But they can get this anywhere books are sold.
Yes.
Any other last words you want to leave us with around the book?
I mean, I think just that I think it will be well received by both partners, and ideally you read it together. And I think you will learn not just a lot about the mental load, but in general, your relationship will shift in such a dramatic way. And so I'm just excited to see how it impacts couples. Thank you for having me on. Thanks for taking the time. I
Yeah,
appreciate it. Yeah.
yeah. I mean,
Thank you for your work. It's
we're
important.
in it. I would say in a lot of ways we're in it together and like trying to make this work, trying to help families get out of this rut that
Yeah.
we've been able to identify and come up with some vocabulary for ourselves. So
Yeah.
I'm to help boost any kind of work that's doing the same work that I'm doing in
Feel the
tandem.
same. Thank you. Appreciate you.
Bye, Dr. Morgan.
Have a good one. Bye, Zach.